Welcome to Coupable. My name is Michael Dunham. I'm the Director of Planning, and with me today is Patrick Fontana, founder of Fontana Financial Planning.
Cheers, Michael.
Welcome. Cheers. Patrick, today I want to talk about reframing. And so to kick things off, you and I both read a book that recently came out by a great writer in this industry, Barry Ritholtz. The book was called How Not to Invest. And so to kick things off, I'll turn it over to you to talk a little bit about one of the lessons that we took from that book.
Sure. So the one that stands out right away that I really liked was him just hitting right out of the gates how powerful it is to admit to ourselves and to set as a baseline that we don't know. Because so many people will put it out there that they know something that's going to happen. The market's going to go up, the market's going to go down, this is going to happen, that's going to happen. And ultimately, we don't know. And when you accept that, it can be to your benefit. The other point I like that he breaks down is just how important time is. You know, time is important in investing, but time's also important in life. Did you lay out the stat that he used on the time for our life?
Yeah. And so the average life expectancy is roughly 80 years, which the way that he frames this is that can seem like a really long time, right? Like it's easy to say like, oh, 80 years is a really long time. Another way to look at that same number is it's roughly 4,000 weeks, which seems much shorter, and so the lesson or the takeaway is essentially don't take a week for granted because you only have 4,000 of them. And it's very easy. It's very easy to do. It's very easy to let a week pass by. And that's the lesson, is not to take that for granted.
Right. Absolutely. So I know another thing we talked about was when you look at folks that live far away from their parents, say folks are 65 years old, you take a job out on the West Coast, they're on the East Coast. How often do you go see them?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so this is a lesson from another book that I recently read called The 5 Types of Wealth by author's name is Sahil Bloom. And it's actually him talking about his own personal story.
Mm-hmm.
And so basically he had moved out to the West Coast, was working, on paper, a great job, making great money, had a great life, but his family was on the other side of the country. And so he was having a conversation with one of his friends who was kind of asking, he knew his family was important to him. How old are your parents? How often do you see them? His parents were 65. He saw them about once a year. And so his friend kind of opened his eyes by reframing the situation of, you're going to see your parents 15 more times before they die. And so it's a great lesson on prioritizing things other than money. Obviously, money is a tool and money allows us to pursue certain things in life, but it's not the only type of wealth. And so it's just a good reframing on how to view and how to treat other things that are really important to us in our life.
Yeah, it hits home with me because my folks are 80 years old. And fortunately, they live up the street now, and I get to have breakfast with them every Wednesday. And for this period of my life, it's kind of a highlight to just get that quality time with them. The other thing that hit home was our kids, and the stat of 90% of the time that we get with them is done by the time they go to college, right? So I've got a senior in high school and a junior in high school. And when you break down that stat and think like, I'm not going to get that much more time with them before they're off, and I'm getting much less time with them. So it's made me lay out a rule of just essentially saying yes to everything. If my daughter wants to go for a run, yes. If they need help with school or anything where I get a chance to do something with them. And a lot of times, frankly, it passes pretty quickly. If she wants to go for a run, about 20 minutes later, it's over, so I don't want to miss that. And I've missed it in the past, and I've made a commitment now to just not miss it. So it's important. You got a lot of time still with Trip as a little bitty guy, but it's going to fly by.
Yeah. And I'm realizing how quickly it does. He's almost 2 already. And it feels like just yesterday we were preparing for him to enter the world.
I remember the explosion with the gender reveal party.
So at this point, I wanted to take this same theme of reframing and apply it to some of the financial planning conversations that we have. And I think it's easy when we have these conversations. Sometimes the numbers don't seem huge when you look at them in isolation. And it's easy to think that's not really going to have that big of an impact. But if you play things out, they often do have a much bigger impact than they may initially seem. And so the first one was funding Roth IRA. And so the scenario that I want to lay out is if you are a business owner and you have a 12-year-old and you say, hey, I'm going to make the decision to hire them within my business, pay them enough money so that they can fully fund their Roth IRA this year here in 2025. That's $7,000. In isolation, that may not seem like that big of a deal. But if we play that out for the rest of their life and we say, hey, what if they earned a 10% annual rate of return on the money? So a good rate of return. But if they funded their Roth IRA at 12, earned 10% a year up until the time they turn 65, that $7,000 contribution is really $1 million at that point in time. So it's a much bigger deal because they have time on their side and because we're making the decision to fund early in life.
And the short-term benefit of that, if you're in the top tax bracket, it's about $2,600. So if it moves it from the top income tax bracket to the zero tax bracket, that's an immediate savings. Selfishly, for me, to hire my 12-year-old.
Patrick, are you saying you can reduce your tax bill and set aside a future value of $1 million for your child?
Absolutely.
Awesome. So the next one that I'll pass over to you on is maxing out HSAs.
So maxing out HSA, I think, is the kind of top choice right now for the place we can put money. You get a tax break for putting money in, and then the growth is tax free. So this came about by accident when I had an employer that put money in and it came in through the paycheck. So at the beginning of the year, you had no balance. You'd go to use your HSA card and it wouldn't work. So essentially we made the decision, let's just not use that card rather than get rejected at the doctor for a small charge. And we'll fully fund the HSA into an investment. So a year passed by, it was working out fine. Did it again. Now, as you and I both know, we fully fund our HSA and invest it and don't use it at all for spending. And that thing builds up pretty quick. So I know you ran the numbers on an example of just maxing for 10 years. You're getting a tax break for each one of those things you put in. But the number that came out, if you got that 10% growth, was huge.
Yeah. And so the limit this year for a family under the age of 55 is $8,550 is what you're allowed to fund this year. And so if you did that amount for the next 10 years, and again, like the example before, earned a 10% rate of return on the investment, doing that would result in a net number of $271,000 of tax-free money set aside for healthcare expenses over that 10-year time frame.
That goes a long way towards endowing your own healthcare, tax-free.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so the last one that I wanted to talk about was Roth conversions. And so Roth conversions, the way that we approach this, essentially what a Roth conversion is you saying, I want to intentionally pay taxes this year. I want to take some of my pre-tax retirement money and I want to flip it over to Roth, make it tax-free forever in exchange for paying taxes on that money this year. And so the way that we typically look at Roth conversions is there an opportunity to pay taxes at a advantageous rate versus what we may expect to owe on this money in the future? And if we can, that's when it turns into a good deal. And we're looking at that situation through a couple of different lenses. So typically, if we're working with a married couple, we're looking at it through the tax situation of both of those individuals. We know that one will typically outlive the other. And at that point in time, taxes get a little bit worse for you when you're on the single side of the tax bracket. And then finally, when the money passes on to the next generation, generally speaking, they're forced to take that money out over a 10-year time frame. And a lot of times they're inheriting that money when they are in a higher tax bracket and they're in their peak earning years compared to their parents. And so, when we run these calculations, we may say, hey, let's do $30,000 of Roth conversion. Maybe that's the opportunity to convert at a 12% bracket or a 24% bracket or some advantageous rate. And $30,000 may not seem like that big of a deal. But similar to the HSA conversation, if we were able to convert $30,000 a year over a 10-year period, and then that $300,000 was able to grow to say $1 million by the time it passed on to the next generation. And let's say the next generation was a top earner in the top tax bracket and the parents were, call it the 12% bracket. That $1 million being tax-free for the high earning children would theoretically save $250,000 in taxes. And so while a $30,000 Roth conversion in a given year may not seem like that big of a deal, it can have a very large tax impact when planned appropriately.
Right. Little things add up. So to close us out, what are we going to do?
Speaking of little things that add up,
Rebalance until rich.
Cheers.